Hi, welcome to A Watchman's Journal. I'm Diana Larkin. I have a special interview for you today with John Redenbo, which we had on just not too long ago before the holidays. He is from Dream Life Decoded. He does amazing dream decoding with teams that he trains up. And then also Brian Palencia is joining us today from Love Has a Name YouTube channel. And many of you have met Brian before, either on his own channel or when I have interviewed him. He has had a series of dreams, prophetic dreams on DJT. And so we picked out like 3 out of the number that he has had, and we wanted to run them by John and just see what we all come up with together as we share them. So John, thank you for returning as a guest.
Such a pleasure to be here with you, Diana and Brian. I'm so excited to meet you and just to hear what the Lord has to say through dreams.
Amen. It's a pretty exciting world out there right now. And we are going to need dreams. We need the spiritual intelligence that they supply us with in this day of uncharted territory. And Brian, welcome back as well.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. And good to meet you, John.
Good to meet you too.
I love bringing people together because it just creates, I don't know what happens, but the anointing in each of us joins with the anointing in someone else, and something amazing happens that God does in our midst. So, Brian, why don't you just jump in and let's start with this. Share your first prophetic dream here.
All right. Well, let me pull this up here. And while I'm pulling that up, I do want to mention to you, Diana, that a couple months back, and I think I briefly mentioned this to you before, that I had sensed that eventually it would be a great idea to have a company of believers come together, as in more than just you interviewing someone else. So I didn't want to say anything because I don't want to meddle in it. I'll just let the Lord. But I'm like, okay, Lord, that would be awesome. And I saw that happen with Ash the first time. So and what an honor. And I didn't say anything, but the Lord led you to set this up. So I'm very honored, and it's just a joy to see God do what he wants when we don't get in the way and we don't meddle unless he needs us to do a part.
Yeah.
So let me get my notes here.
Well, I think I had some kind of a milestone happen today. I was just on YouTube for a minute checking something, and I saw my picture on a video, and I looked at it, and it wasn't my channel, wasn't my account. It was somebody else had pirated it. So it's my first pirated video. So there you go.
You're famous.
Praise
They're
God.
stealing your stuff.
Okay. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, I have 3 here. I guess I'll just start from the top.
Do it.
All right. So this is just word for word the prophetic dream that I had regarding DJT, and this was on February 27th, 2021. In this dream, I find myself looking into a place that was indoors, and I just had the awareness that there were 3 sections to this place. It seemed to be some sort of building. I don't know what it looked like on the outside, just the inside, but I knew there was like 3 compartments. And you can almost liken it to like a living room going into the dining room, going into the kitchen. It was all open, and nothing dividing it. Suddenly, I was in the setting. So I was no longer looking in, but I was a part of the dream. And in this scene in front of me, about 5 feet in front of me, I found myself in front of DJT. And to his left, so as I'm looking at him, it would be to my right. To DJT's left, I saw another man, and I never did see his face very clearly. To the right of DJT, there was a kiosk, and it almost looked like if you're going to a conference or a doctor's office where you got to check in or whatnot. I noticed the scene around me, and then DJT, he seemed to be checking in. To his left, I then noticed that he and the person whose face I didn't see seemed to be wearing the same suit, but the suit was very, and I describe it as tacky. It's not a word that I would use, but it would be something, I guess, somebody who was a very, very humorous that they would wear, or someone who was very, very confident could wear. And the way I described it was that they both had the identical suit, and it was all black, and it seemed to have like blue diagonals going across, just a pattern of blue diagonal lines, zigzags. Due to both of them wearing the same thing, I kind of perceived that they were kind of like twins. So that thought came to my mind. I pointed out that DJT and the other person, or I pointed to DJT, excuse me. I pointed to him and to the other person, and I gave them a thumbs up, kind of, I guess, acknowledging their twin apparel. And DJT smiled, and when he smiled at me, he seemed to communicate that as if he knew me and he was treating me like someone who was a close supporter and even an ally. So that was the first part. Do I want to run through the whole thing?
Yeah,
Preferable? Okay.
sure.
So the next part, both DJT and the twin, as I'm going to call them, walked into the second section of this scene. So since there was 3 sections, now they're in the middle. They walked into the second section, and they walked all the way through until they just stepped into the third section. I followed along behind them, but I stopped in the second section, and I noticed as I looked around that there were many people there. So the bulk of the people in this dream were in the second section. They were sitting against the wall as if they were waiting around, and it seemed almost like when you're at an airport and people are waiting for their flight, there's not enough place to sit, they're sitting against the wall. So they were definitely in a waiting posture. Then I saw a small boy who seemed to be about 3 years old in that second section. And I knew within the dream, I knew that he was DJT's son, quote unquote. Now, obviously that doesn't relate to in the natural realm, but in the dream, it was his son. I also knew that the boy didn't want to put on his coat because he already had a sweater or a jacket underneath. While the others were sitting against the walls, I was standing. I was standing, and I was very, very active. I took the initiative to go and help the child to put on his coat. I noticed that, or I knew that he was supposed to join DJT, following them into the third section. And he needed some help. So I went ahead and stepped in. I took initiative, and I told the child, you don't have to zip it necessarily, but put on your coat. And I sent him off into the third section, the third room. I also stepped in as I was nudging him in. As far as I could tell, it seemed like that third room ended, with the wall being there at the end. But strangely enough, I saw DJT go up a couple of steps. I would say there was maybe 3, 4 to 5 steps that led into the back wall. And even though I didn't see anything there, I had this sense, or at least the feeling, that as he was stepping up, it reminded me as one who would be boarding a helicopter. So I didn't actually see it. He seemed as if he was going to step into the wall. DJT stopped at the top just before going through. He turned around and he looked at me, and he gave me another thumbs up, or he gave me a thumbs up this time, and he acknowledged my part in helping the young boy get moving so as to not be left behind. And it ended there.
Wow. That's a fun one.
Awesome.
I think my favorite part is the blue tacky suit with the blue diagonals, but
Yeah, that's a really interesting symbol. We could spend 2 hours easily on this. We believe that all dreams come from God, and not only do the dreams come from God, but each of the symbols are hand placed for a reason. And so if you skip, if we just say the black suit, and don't include the blue, we're missing a level of shading of the story of what he wants to get. And so I took about a page worth of notes while you said this. And you did send the dreams in advance, but I have been so swamped this weekend that I actually pulled it open about a half hour ago. And so that I'm like, oh, I got to shower. And so I kind of read through it, but I didn't digest it. I really didn't understand the dream until you read it.
Okay.
To really be able to be in that still place and just hear what you were saying. I was like, wait, what is this 3-section bit? And who's this kid? And now I'm like, okay, when you don't skip and you read it all, it makes a lot of sense. But there's a lot here. How do you want to proceed, Diana? What would you like to do?
You just dive in and do whatever you want. We'll add anything that we feel like would be worth adding, but
okay. Well, I think it's really interesting, the date to start with. It's February 27th of 2021. It was right around this time that they started the Reawaken America tour. It was right around this time, February or March, I don't remember exactly, that I was in the hospital with COVID.
wow.
And right when I came out of that, like within a week, is when we launched Dream Life Decoded and we began doing some of the things we're doing. So from my perspective, it's a really significant time. I feel like it's where the modern dream side of what we call spiritual intelligence really began to take off. It was also around that time that they had the first ever window to the supernatural. And I was I think the first, second, and third guest on Window to the Supernatural.
Amazing.
And so it's just a really interesting season. I was also struck by how close to 222 it is. It's 5 days away from 222. Which for me is the number of spiritual intelligence in Daniel 2:22, but also resonates into the birth of George Washington's birthday, as well as Isaiah 22:22. It's about government, it's about authority, but particularly he reveals the deep and hidden things.
Yeah.
And of course, the grace, the idea of 27, 5 days off from 222, and then 1 year off from 222, I think is interesting. And so there's a grace for preparation to be almost there, is kind of what I'm hearing just on the date. What I think is really interesting is God is showing you something and you're on the outside looking in. Now, by the way, this is 1 month after January 6th.
Yes.
This is a month and 7 days after the inauguration. The inauguration.
Yeah, right.
Say that, but yeah.
Yes.
We'll say it diplomatically. This is 1 month after the media told us that that Joe Biden was inaugurated president of the United States. Nobody can argue with that. I think it's interesting how you're looking at 3 sections of a house in particular. And you think of famous houses, it's easy to think of like a White House and the different sections, the West Wing, the East Wing, the center focus of the house where the columns are and the residence is, and different things like that. Not that you saw the White House per se, but just it's easy to see different sections of that house in particular. And you were in an open area where you were looking in and you were seeing 3 sections. And then suddenly you were inside. Suddenly you were in this area, and DJT was there as well. And so I think that's really interesting. The unknown man on the left of DJT, the kiosk as far as checking in on the right. I think that's really key. Checking in is the idea of registering. It's the idea of showing up, being where you're supposed to be, knowing that you're on the list, knowing that you have access, knowing that you have authority, knowing that you've been pre-registered, they're expecting you coming, you're supposed to be there. It's all of these things are related to just the simple idea of checking in. And so DJT was there with his twin with the tacky suits, and they were checking in. I think it's interesting that black and blue diagonal design. So black and blue to me sounds just like you would think, black and blue. It's interesting because when I got up, when I showered just before we came on, I have several different colognes I use, but one of them is called, I think it's called Blue on Black. And I just like, wow, whatever. But everything is significant. Everything, even the things that we do in the morning and our routines are significant. But I put that on just before coming to be on the Zoom call. But black and blue is the idea of bruising. It's the idea of the school of hard knocks. It's the idea that it's representing a probably a chaotic time and a difficult time for some people. The idea of the diagonal stripes, I heard bishop, as in the bishop move in chess, you know, which he moves diagonally. And that's the only way the bishop moves. Which it's just kind of in a flood of knowingness, which happens a lot of times when we're working on dreams. Is God just reminded me of some of the things that we've talked about are things like exposure. A lot of people feel really beat up and black and blue when big things come out that destroys their life and reputation. They feel like they've been bludgeoned. And so the idea of being black and blue, and but also the idea of the diagonal move. Most of the moves in chess, other than the knight, are in a horizontal or vertical fashion, and generally they're moving forward. So a lot of people, especially if you haven't played a lot of chess, can easily forget about the bishop and the fact that they can shoot across the board from one side to the other, from one end to the other, and it can be the play that people don't see coming. I also think of bishop as in the religious sense we would think of in the older movies like The Three Musketeers, when they talk about the bishop or the cardinal and how they kind of co-reigned with the king. And they fed off of each other. Often there was an unholy alliance where the cardinal would confirm what they call the divine right of kings, that God has blessed this king and this king is supposed to lead our nation, and they would get kickbacks and money and power, and they could condemn somebody's marriage and allow somebody else's divorce, and they just kind of was a very fluid environment where they were claiming both God and the government in this unholy alliance to in a lot of ways control and manipulate the masses. And so when I think of bishop, I think of all of those things, but I also think of exposure happening and exposure beginning in the church in particular. And bishops, of course, would represent high-level people, what many call the apostolic. If you're not in a denomination that has bishops, you think of the apostolic, somebody that starts other churches or that leads other leaders, like a pastor to pastors. I was really good friends with and did a lot of training for a bishop in the Church of God in Christ who had 174 other pastors in the state of Ohio that reported to him. And so that's just to give you an idea of the level of authority and purview that somebody like that has. They may not be a national figure, but then you look at somebody like a Bishop Blake in the Church of God in Christ, who is a national figure, and people in that denomination and many other denominations know who he is and understand the weight of the authority. And so in particular, I feel like what that is saying is blue is also the color of revelation. Black is the color of darkness. We started with Daniel 2:22. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. And so in particular, for religious leaders, leaders of movements, leaders at high level, the diagonal play, the play that people don't see coming, is there's going to be blue revelation and exposure of black, what lies in darkness, that's going to happen in the world of particularly leaders of faith, leaders of movements, religious leaders. None of this, honestly, except for the breakdown of it, is particularly revelationary, because we already know that this is happening. It's not happening in one movement. It's happening in multiple movements. It's happening with people that we may know and love. And other leaders that we've heard of that we may not necessarily listen to or associate with, but they are very high level leaders and revered in other movements and in other cultures. And so that's all just a confirmation of where things are. What's also interesting is the unknown man is the man on the left, which to me reminds me of a pairing between left and right. It's so easy to, the powers that be, the press, the media, people in control have done a lot to try to convince us of the duality of our choice, that it's, you can be right or you can be left. And it's really the illusion of choice. And very many people on both the right and the left are in agreement and corrupt and all part of the same big quagmire that we call the swamp and that DJT wants to clean up and drain. But they continue to try to pose the Republicans fighting the Democrats, or blacks fighting whites, or rich fighting poor, or whatever. But in the political sector, it's right and left. So the man on the left, whose face we don't see, honestly reminds me of the current situation we have with who the media tells us is in charge of the country. It's interesting because you wouldn't think in this dream that that's who that twin would represent. You would think it would represent somebody like a Roger Stone, or somebody that's close to Trump, or somebody that would dress like him and be with him. But if it represents the exposure, the coming to light, the blue of the black of what lies in darkness, starting in the religious world, but moving into the political world and even the global world of what's happening in the realm of nations, centerpiece of that play, if you will, or that show, if you will, that's happening in America, would be these two central figures, one on the left and one on the right, Trump being on the right. So I think that's really interesting. And obviously there's a whole lot of exposure going on that is not pleasant for what's happening in his family and his son on the left. And so I think it's interesting that you don't see his face. A lot of times God will hide the face of someone because he'll give it either by revelation later, or because if we saw the face, it would trip us up. It wouldn't make sense. Why would you see Joe Biden and Donald Trump wearing the same suit, checking in at the same time into a 3-section house? This makes zero sense at all. And we get hung up on the identity of what this is saying versus the symbol. If you look at him as a placeholder in a play, and it's the idea of the leftist president that we allegedly have now, whether it's him or it's a body double or it's something else, it's a representation of him. And whether who's really in charge, we're not really discussing. I want to kind of stay with the dream. But it's the idea of a concept being represented. There are a lot of concepts that are being represented in our world today, in things like the mainstream media, that people are accepting as fact, and they're the furthest thing from fact. But that's where people get deceived. If you try to hook your GPS or your wagon to what the news media tells you, or what even your Telegram groups tell you, or what your friends tell you, or what your pastors tell you, and you're not hearing from God directly to get revelation from him on the truth of the world, it's very, very hard to be grounded in this season. All of this is the setup. And then suddenly you're in it. So I think it's really interesting that you observe from the outside the setting that you're about to enter in, and then bam, there you are. It feels like that's what happened with 2024. It feels like I was thinking about, man, there's so many things I got to do by the end of the year. I was thinking even today, I'm like, man, I need to do some things before the new year. And I'm like, it's the 3rd. Like, I've missed the boat. Like, there's no going back, you know. It's 4:44 right now on January 3rd, Central Time. But
Hallelujah.
It's just like suddenly here we are. It still feels kind of like we're in 2020. I feel like we didn't even live all of that year because so much of that was in lockdown. I kind of still feel like we're back in 2020, and yet and there's so many unresolved things from 2020. And God has exposed and showed us, even advanced the roots of where those things came into our country by covenant made by the President of the United States in 1946, and all of these pieces that we won't get into because it's beyond the scope of what's here. But God has showed us in dreams how things were birthed way back at the end of World War II that led to fruition. And every single thing that we saw in 2020, we can trace back to one day, one agreement signed by one president over 50 years ago. And it's amazing that we see this, because that's what dreams are doing. It's revealing. And this is what this dream is doing, is it's revealing the idea that they are suited up and have the mantle for revelation of things that lie in darkness, coming literally out of nowhere, off from the side, the diagonal move in chess that nobody sees. And that's the mantle they wear as they step into this house, and you're suddenly there and they're checking in. They know they're supposed to be there. They're there to play a part, whether you're an attendee at a conference or a keynote speaker. You still have to check in, get your credentials, get authorized, get access, get security, get materials, whatever it is. And so that's what's happening, is they're checking in on the right at this kiosk. And I think there's so much of this I don't want to get stuck in this place because there's so much more, but we could even do a breakdown of the word kiosk, or the idea of a tacky suit. John Gotti was the Teflon Don, nothing stuck to him, right? A tacky suit is the idea of having a mantle, or imagine wearing a suit of fly tape. Like literally anything you throw is going to stick. And it's the idea, again, of revealing what lies in darkness, what's sticking to you. And it's not that it's necessarily there's been evil, particularly on the side of DJT, in my opinion, particularly with this suit, but it's the idea that what is being exposed is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. People are going to be bruised. It's going to come out of nowhere, and it's going to stick. And it's going to be on both the right and the left. All of that from just the suits.
Amazing.
Did you guys want to comment on that? I don't want to just... Any thoughts?
What were you doing? Where were you, Brian, at that time? Like as far as following DJT, I mean, kind of where were you in that? Were you praying for him a lot, or was that a transition for you?
Oh, okay, in that time. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2020. It was November where I received my first dream with DJT. And in that dream, the Lord basically was showing me that I was being called to stand up for him and to be a voice, not only for God, but for DJT. And then that ended up over the span of about a year and a half. I think I've had about 10 to 12 dreams, visions regarding DJT. I actually haven't had anything in the past year or so, maybe one or two. But that first year was really, really strong. And I had to, choose to be, I'm kind of used to I'm going for a Lord, and I don't care if anybody doesn't like me, because I kind of went through a wilderness that kind of set me up in my character for that. But I was, I guess, about 3 months in, beginning to really seek the Lord. Okay, what is this about DJT? Because I didn't pay attention to him. I didn't know anything about him. But as I began to listen to the prophets and hear the wisdom, and my open heart, the Lord used that to help me to see his perspective and to understand how the world is viewing DJT, and how it's skewed because they're not seeing through the eyes of God and through the ways of God. So it was still early on. But
cool.
That's so amazing. I just love that. There's a guy named Dana Coverstone that had a series of dreams, first at the end of 2019, and then 2 in the middle of June in 2020. By no fault or doing of my own, I was the first person that interviewed him. And I became a little upset at major voices in the prophetic who were doing a response to the Dana Coverstone dream videos. And I'm like, why are we responding to a dream that nobody's interpreted? Why don't we interpret it first? And God said, well, why don't you do that? And so I spent locked in my house by myself in that time. And 2020 was a really interesting year. I spent 32 days eating, sleeping, and working on these 3 Dana Coverstone dreams. And by the time I was done, it was August 2nd. And God was showing us, he was showing me the juxtaposition of the 2020 election. This is before the election happened, with the election of 1800 and the Thomas Jefferson play, which was there was in the election of 1800, there was mail-in voter fraud in the state of Georgia on behalf of the Democrats in 1800.
They started early.
We're literally the second election out from George Washington, and they were pulling this stuff in the same state, the same side, the same thing that they're doing now. And I thought it was really interesting. And what happened was Georgia didn't agree, so they sent in 2 slates of electors. We got 13 colonies, I think, back then. They send in 2 slates of electors, and of course, Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution is very clear. It is the vice president's purview alone to make the decision what envelopes he accepts. Everybody knew it was the Democrats that were cheating. It was in the newspapers. The governor knew it. The attorney general knew it. But back in that day, if you and I were running for president, I get the most votes, I win. You get the second most votes, you're vice. So John Adams was president. Thomas Jefferson was vice president. He was in Pence's seat. And so if he opened the ones for the Democrat, it would benefit him because he might win. If he opens the one for the Republican, which was what everybody expected him to do, then John Adams was the unquestioned second-term president of the United States. Well, he did what was unexpected, the sideways thing that nobody saw coming, and he opened the Democratic one. Well, there's no remedy. The Constitution is clear. You can't go to the Supreme Court. There's no higher appeal. The Constitution is very clear on this issue. It's the vice president's job and his alone, which I thought it was interesting when they were arguing this around January 6th. And when people, well, no, he doesn't have that. I'm like, guys, all you got to do is read the Constitution. There is no way possible you can try to malign Article 2, Section 1 into making people believe that it's not the vice president's job. And so because he opened the Democratic one, it threw it into a dead heat. And they had to decide the president by a vote in the House of Representatives, which took them 37 ballots to do it. And Thomas Jefferson became the 3rd president of the United States. And so God was saying the election of 2020 is going to be like that. And I'm like, God, there's no way that one state is going to hamstring the Electoral College and throw it into a dead heat. Of course, I never thought, what if 5 states do the same thing that Georgia did in the election of 1800? What's really interesting is the first time I was ever at a Trump event, which was after this was, I think it was in January of 2022. I was in the room and the way was paved for somebody had extra tickets. We got free parking. We get inside the booth. We don't have to wait in line at all. We just walk up to the building. They let us. It's like a mile long line. As soon as we get through the metal detector, somebody walks up and said, "Would you like upgraded VIP seats?" We get put in a section where the Secret Service is. They kick everybody else out of the section and they tell us to leave. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to leave. Well, we're going to get the Secret Service. I've worked security with the Secret Service before. I'm like, okay, go get them. And of course, we never heard from them again. So we're sitting alone in this section and somebody asks, Bill O'Reilly says, does anybody have any questions? And somebody asks, what do you think of Mike Pence? And this is the first time, and at this point, the only time I'd ever heard him say this. He says, you know what Mike Pence did? Mike Pence did the Thomas Jefferson play of the election of 1800. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Nobody knows that. Like historians don't know that. The fact that DJT knew that, and the first time I ever heard him say that was when I was in the room. I was flabbergasted because, again, we saw this before the election. And then, of course, what happened in November was groundbreaking in our nation's history. And we won't get into that, but I just think it's interesting that right at that time, God begins to speak to you in November of 2020 about Trump. That's amazing.
It is. When you add all that, yes, even more so.
Yeah, right. And by the way, just as a side note, again, I'm not going to go into a full-fledged brief on another dream. what God told us is the election, the Thomas Jefferson play of the election of 1800 would not stand for 2020,
Wow.
was canceled for 2020. And the reason he showed us that is Dana Coverstone had a dream about a coin shortage. And he walks into a bank and they say that we stop printing pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and the 1 and 5s will follow soon. Well, I'm like, first thing I want to know is this real? Is this a real thing? And so I had to look. I didn't even know how to look it up, but I found that the Federal Reserve sends a money order to the U.S. Treasury for the paper. It goes to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and they print the dollar bills. And for the coinage, it goes to the 4 U.S. mints. And so I started looking. So I found the money order from the Federal Reserve to the U.S. Treasury for the end of the fiscal year of 2019 going into 2020. And it was pretty much the same as the year before, with like a 3% increase, like you would for inflation. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But then I found the addendum to the money order in 2020, which I don't think they ever do. And it's because we were in lockdown and money wasn't moving around. They actually printed more money in April. They had an addendum to the original order than they do in any given year. And they were printing pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars, 1s and 5s. So everything that the person in the dream told us was a lie, but there was one piece of currency that they print normally in any given year that they didn't print in the initial order in 2020 or in the addendum to 2020. And that, of course, was the $2 bill. And Thomas Jefferson is the face of the $2 bill. And that's when God
Wow.
told us the Thomas Jefferson play for the election for the year 2020 is canceled. And then, of course, when January 6th happens and then January 20th happens, we're all like, and then the whole prophets, well, we heard this and then we heard that. And I'm just like, I'm just going to sit here and keep my mouth shut. But I don't think things are as they seem. And I don't think this election is going to stand. Well, we have another year, a year and 17 days to find out. But, and I'm happy to be wrong. But it's interesting that when the prophetic kind of went in two different directions related to Trump after 2020, the dreams never changed. God told us to be quiet and to stay hidden. And so we haven't gotten on YouTube and blasted our thoughts about who's going to be in the White House or who's going to win or.
Oh, please come back.
All of that. But that's by looking at like 250 dreams about Trump. And we even decided to say, okay, let's only look at dreams after January 6th. Let's only look at dreams after January 20th. They never changed from 3 and 4 years before to a year or two after. It's all the same theme. God's not schizophrenic. He didn't change his mind. A lot of people, I believe, again, either I'm wrong, which I'm happy to be wrong, and then that's a data point. We'll go back and review. God, show us where we went wrong. Or there's going to be a whole lot of people that are surprised and that are also going to feel vindicated that what they felt that they were hearing from God was actually what may be the case and what may be happening. So again, black and blue, the exposure of the things hidden in darkness, the sideways move that nobody sees coming, the right, the left, tacky stuff, things sticking to a mantle, allegations coming forth, exposure happening. That's the first scene.
Amazing. I just wanted to touch on this when it's, as you were talking, first of all, I'm just like, oh Lord, this is like several floors, levels beyond what even I knew was possible in God, which so I'm just amazed and I love the gift that God has given you. But as you were reading and you're mentioning twins, I'm reminded of the Kim Clement prophecies, 2 presidents.
Yeah.
Wow.
Time of 2 presidents. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that sounds like it plays another part in there.
Whoa. Yeah.
Big picture, I
Very
feel like
cool.
the 3-section house is a 3-act play that those 2 characters are going to walk through together.
Mm.
So I think it's interesting how they're first checking in. They're at the kiosk, and you see them first checking in. Is obviously a time that's passed. And then they both go into the second section, but they go through the second section to the third section. we're in the second section now. And the second section is this 4 years between 2020 and 2024, I believe. And you guys, you understand what
Do you
I'm saying.
think that, yeah, I do. Do you think the 3-year-old son represents the 3 years?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Absolutely. I'm glad you heard that too as well, Diana.
Okay.
I love the conference. Everything we do, we try to do in a group of people. So it's not
Yeah.
one person saying, well, I got the end. No.
Mhm.
Sit down with, we have 6 teams working on one dream, and then we all come together and say, what are we hearing? What is God saying? And I feel like that's actually the new standard that's coming out, and what we call spiritual intelligence, the new movement in the prophetic. And it's so much less about superstars and the man of power for the hour declaring the word of the Lord over the nation, because so many of that has been subject to mixture, to people getting things wrong, to character and moral failures and things like that. And so there's safety in the company of the prophets, where people come together and let us reason, and you hear from God, Diana hears from God, I hear from God. And so I want to know your all's thoughts, and I want to know, how does this resonate? And that's exactly what I heard for the 3-year-old, is something that is 3 years old that Trump birthed. And actually the thing that came to my mind was the executive orders that he signed before leaving office. But setting the stage for the activation of those executive orders were based on actions that would happen related to or around an election. And that began January 6th and January 20th of 2021, which again is a month and 7 days out from this dream. Literally 5 weeks. 5 days from 2/22, 5 weeks out from January 20th of 2021. That's interesting.
And Trump was 5 feet away from.
Yeah. So there's a 555.
Yeah.
Good catch. Absolutely. It's interesting that he wasn't standing 6 feet away.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it meant something at that time. It's 5 feet. So that's a good catch, Diana. I really like that. So now they're both walking through the second section, and they go through the third section. And you stopped in the second section, and there were all of these people. America is stuck right here, right now, in this section. There were lies that were told. There were things that happened. Again, we're not going to get into unraveling. I want to stick to the focus of the dream. But God is going to expose what lies in darkness. It's going to come from sideways. Now, sideways is from one side of the board to the other, which could mean a whistleblower on the left brings information to people on the right that exposes, blue, revelation, what lies in darkness, black, and it sticks. So again, the black and blue diagonal tacky suit, which seems like just kind of a humorous symbol and probably doesn't mean anything, is really setting the stage for what's about to happen. It's the mantle they both carry. They both carry it, which is really interesting. And they walk through the second section into the third. It's like they don't even have a regard for what's going on in the second section. They walk through it to the third section, right? Do they even stop in the second section at all?
Not that I recall. Nope. Just step right into the third.
And that's what I felt. I'm like, man, this is where the country is. We're stuck here in this second section. There's a group of a lot of people that believe that Trump won the election. There's a whole lot of other people that believe that Biden won the election. And so we're living in this world where we're like, there's no way we can have a president that is blundering this bad, and Congress continues to let him operate the nuclear codes of our nation. Like, this has to be a joke or a play, or we're being horribly gaslit, and again, it's like 3 parts of a play. And the vast majority of people are stuck in the middle, and they don't know what to do. And so they're sitting on the sidelines. And this includes many people in the church, where there's been the whole back and forth thing with the prophetic, but there's been a whole lot of people that you would get made fun of in sub movements to believe that Trump won the election. you'd get made fun of in other movements to believe that Biden won the election. And so there's this country that's sitting here in the midst of what's happening, in this place of unknown, in this place of waiting, in this middle section that is very akin almost to the second heaven, where there's this chaos and this stuff, and people are just there. Nobody's doing anything. Half the people are believing that somebody else isn't, so the white hats are winning, and this is going to happen, and this is going to come in, and they're going to set things right. And there are other people like, oh, you believe in that? You're out to lunch. What are you thinking? Nobody's coming to save us, and if we don't fix it. And so there's all of these opinions and chaos in the world that it literally is like the second heaven. There's a ton of flesh there. There's a ton of demonic influences there. There's gaslighting. And people frozen in fear, don't know what to do, which is part of the game plan of those that are trying to move people or divide people, as they want people to stay fragmented, and they want them to stay on the sidelines so they can have their way and they can do their thing. The people that are crooked, that are pulling the strings, there's no ambiguity in their heart who should be in the White House, who won the election, what they're doing is good or evil. Like, they're not confused. There's a group of people, a very small group of people who really know what's going on, and they're pushing things hard and trying to convince everybody else of one way or another. A massive psyop, as we know. Again, that's not particularly revelationary. What is the idea that both Biden and Trump know they're not playing the game in the second section, they're in the third section. So everything they're doing is set up for what's about to happen. And what's about to happen is going to happen this year. This year we'll know. And either the 2020 election will be forever cemented in American history, or it'll be overturned. But I think if anything is ever going to happen related to the 2020 election, it has to be before the 2024 election. And again, many words, many dreams, many pieces of intel related to that. But all of these people sitting on the sidelines in this waiting posture. And then there's this 3-year-old boy, the son of Trump, not Barron, but something that Donald Trump birthed 3 years ago. There was a move that we probably won't even understand until this whole thing is explained to us when it's all over. There's a move that he made willingly and knowingly. And I believe he did it because of a supernatural grace and wisdom that was upon him. Nobody gets pregnant and births a kid by themselves. No couple even. There's a divine intervention that happens when God says, I want to create a person. And we all know couples that have tried and haven't been able to. And God has a purpose and a destiny when something is birthed. And it comes from not just the will of a man and a woman, but there is something that Trump birthed that he may not have even known what he did, or by supernatural wisdom, he put some things in place that have been in place for 3 years now. And these things, whatever this is, has struggled to wear a label or a mantle. It doesn't want to put on the coat.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. When you think of Joseph and the coat of many colors, people could see him coming a mile away. They knew who he was. It was identity. It was purpose. It was the multicolored rainbow. It was the 7 spirits of God. It was revelation. It was all these things. But this 3-year-old does not want his coat on. He doesn't want to be labeled. He doesn't want to carry a mantle. When he does carry a mantle, he's going to go into the third scene. And so your job in this dream, your biggest action in this dream, is to stop in the second section, even though the 2 players have passed through, not to deal with the crowd, not even to deal with yourself, but to assist what was birthed 3 years ago, to put on the mantle. It doesn't even have to be all zipped up. Everything doesn't, I think, is zip ties. Everybody doesn't have to be arrested. Everybody doesn't have to be in jail for the mantle to be worn. The mantle does have to be put on. It has to be called for what it is. At some point, we're going to know, was it this way or was it that way? There's two main competing schools of thought right now, and the media is pushing very, very hard. They were from the, remember the office of the president-elect. What the heck was that even? I mean, come on. Talk about pulling a title out of thin air and pretending like they made a seal for it and put it up on a wall somewhere like that made it official. I mean, we've been so gaslit. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
All of that ends, and it ends within the next 12 months.
Wow.
And 17 days.
Oof.
What's the number 17 in alphanumeric code? I'm just kidding.
Oh, yes.
Interesting that we're talking today. There's 17 known intelligence agencies in the intelligence
Yes.
community in the government. We'll just stay there. So
that's really interesting. How do you think that Brian has helped get that mantle on? Is that like a picture of intercession? Is it?
You know, I feel like I'm glad you asked that question, just like you did, Diana, because I feel like when the body of Christ doesn't know what to do, they say things like, just pray. Do you know there is not one single dream in the Bible where the actionable intelligence was to pray? Not one. Almost every dream that people are getting right now, they say, well, we have to pray. And I want to be a big advocate to say your dreams don't mean pray more. And they certainly don't mean just pray. There's an action that you have to take, which honestly could very well be this very interview, bringing this dream to light and shedding light on exposure, the black and blue of what's happening, is labeling something that was birthed 3 years ago by Donald John Trump that people are going to begin to know. And it's going to cause, I think, more than just the sun to move to the third section. I think it's going to prepare the country to move into that third act of the play, or the third section, where we're going to hit that back wall and things are either one way or another. And then Donald Trump goes up the stairs and gets on the helicopter. If that isn't a spoiler alert, I don't know what it is.
Agreed.
But yeah, so the fact that you're helping him put on the coat, he doesn't want to put on the coat. He already has a sweater or another jacket, which means he's been labeled one way. The public sees him as one way, but it would be more appropriate for them to see him as another way. But he's resistant to wear that. And that's because there's still a level of hiddenness of things are not as they seem. Once the coat is on, everybody knows. Everybody knows. It's like putting on the FBI jacket, you know. There's no hiding the big FBI letters. People know who you are.
In yellow.
You know.
Yes.
So you're helping him put on the coat, and you even tell him we don't have to zip it up. You just have to wear it. You know, and then he puts the coat on. You help him put the coat on. You leave the area of people sitting on the sidelines, and you escort the son forward into the third section.
Yes.
There's a part of, I believe, the play, whether knowingly or unknowingly, I would believe it was knowingly with the wisdom of God, that Donald Trump set some things in motion 3 years ago, right about this time. Like 3 years ago,
Wow.
exactly.
Wow.
3 days out from January 6th, probably having conversations with Pence, not telling him what to do, getting on there and saying a lot of things about the election was stolen, and people are calling it the big rig, and then people are saying it's the big lie, and then there's this, and then he's like, everybody come to Washington on January 6th, and I will provide you proof that this election was rigged. And so a whole ton of people, families, kids, you know, if you've never heard this before, I would beseech you to do your research. There were probably 1.5 million to 2 million people on January 6th. If you see the pictures, the media will never, ever, ever show you the pictures of the crowd. But by the pictures that I've seen and by friends that were there, you literally could not see the grass of the Washington Memorial. Like there was that many people, probably bigger than most inaugurations, frankly. There were so many people. They weren't there for a riot. There was no insurrection. They were there because they wanted to hear from their president, what say you about this election? We don't believe the other guy won, who sat in his basement, who didn't campaign, who can't make a coherent sentence. You're out there selling out the biggest stadiums and the largest venues all over America. And now they want us to believe, and they want to slam it down our throats in the middle of the night with a vertical leap up, and all, you guys know it. You lived it with me. But that was the call for January 6th, is the president of the United States, what many call our president, wanted to provide a level of proof and explanation why he believed that he won. And I frankly think it was an appropriate thing to do. And that was Ellipsis Park. That wasn't the Capitol building. People went out there. They didn't go out there to go to the Capitol building, at least most people. There was probably a very, very, very small contingent of what many are saying were FBI agents, frankly, that were there about the Capitol building. But most people that were there were hear what the president and Rudy Giuliani and others had to say, particularly Donald Trump, at Ellipsis Park about what was happening and what was the chaotic world we were living in right now. And so I think it's interesting that the mantle is put on. It doesn't have to be zipped up. You escort into the third section. Most of the country is still sitting on the sidelines in the second section. But what you've done is you've heralded a move. It's interesting that the two twins can check in and move seamlessly through the second section to the third section. But many people believe, well, I can't get there. But if a 3-year-old boy can announce to the world, this is what's really going on, and move into the third section, the rest of the country is going to be able to follow. That's not in the dream, but that's what I feel is what the dream is saying. You're assisting in that. This very conversation could be a part of that. Your courage to share this dream, which would knowingly be a controversial dream. You probably weren't aware of the level of depth of how this is talking about things like the election, 2 presidents. There's so much, and again, I'm not trying to shoot off the mouth here to be controversial. We're trying to discern the dream. Our conversation is about this dream and what do the symbols in the dream mean. The 3-year-old Donald John Trump's son is clearly not any of his current sons, because they're not 3 years old, and they certainly aren't that small. He said a small child. So this is something he literally birthed. But what's also interesting is, when did the dream happen? 2021. Was it 2021 about the time that we live in now? That's one possibility. Or was it 2021 and what was birthed in 2018? This is where you want to go pull up the executive orders and find out what was signed when. I think that there was a play made around 3 years prior. Could be prior to the date of the dream. It could be prior to where we're at right now. I believe the dream is about 2024. Certainly, Section 3 is 2024. We've all now headed into that year, but a lot of people are still stuck in this halfway place, not sure what to believe, not sure if things are really as bad as they seem, not sure if we're just all being lied to, or if the end of the world is coming tomorrow. And that's where most people are. But honestly, I think a lot of people have been there for the better part of the last 3 years.
Yes. I
Some
agree.
waiting for things to be imminently overturned, others waiting for the joke to be over with, some waiting for the man behind the curtain to be exposed or the mantle to be put on. But so that's 3 years old when? 3 years old the date of the dream, or 3 years old now as we enter into 2024.
Oh,
Or both.
yeah.
We're sort of 3 years now into the fourth year, going into the we're still in the third year. We're at the very end of the third year of Joe Biden's term in office.
True.
And so if it was 3 years ago, these are plays that were made in the final moments of the alleged Trump presidency first term. If it was 3 years before the date of the dream, it was around this time, January, February of 2018. So again, it's hard to remember back that far. We'd have to go back and begin to look up historical events. What was Trump doing? What was happening in the news? What was the conversations? I mean, I think we were still on Russia collusion back then, or maybe certainly in 2018 we were.
Yeah.
So enter into the third room, go to the back wall. It looks like there's an end. It looks like the end is near, is what I hear. The back wall. Was it a black wall?
I didn't specifically see it as black, but almost the way you would see if you go into a room and you can't see the wall, but so it's like shadowy. And then as you say that, it's interesting because I didn't actually see a clearly, colored wall. It was just, it just felt like that was the end. There's nothing to walk into, but yet somehow he
So
was
the
able
end is shadowy. The end is shaded. We don't know how this ends.
Yeah.
Just yet. But it's interesting that Trump and the twin go all the way to the back. And then you can see Trump going up like several stairs.
Mhm.
You felt like it was stairs, like the stairs to the helicopter, and then turn around and give you the thumbs up.
Yes.
What's really interesting is that evokes two images. One would be the final goodbye of Nixon.
Mm.
Because when a president is defeated, the last thing he does at the White House is he boards Air Force One, or I'm sorry, Marine One,
Mhm.
and then flies to Andrews and then takes the plane home. But if we're in a situation where he's now going to be installed, whatever that scene is, it's not the inauguration. I think it's shadowed for a reason. But let me just throw out if we were writing a movie script, not saying this is the case, but if perhaps Trump was coming back, and he was coming back because the Supreme Court, somebody had decided, the military got involved, whatever, probably the first step would be he would get picked up from wherever he was in a helicopter. If he was returning officially for some reason, could be any number of scenarios, but just spitballing here. Let's say the election was overturned. Let's say the Supreme Court decided. Let's say the military got involved and said there was foreign intervention in our election, which the Senate Intelligence Committee said in the summer of 2020, and they named China, Russia, and Iran. And that was very public, and that's not even controversial. People can go look that up. And if they said that there was enough to place in doubt the result of the election, and they decided that they were going to reverse things in a pretty permanent way, then it would probably happen. The first step would be an announcement, or maybe not, but would probably be Trump getting on a helicopter and then either flying to an Air Force base where Air Force One awaits, or going straight to the White House, depending on where he was at that moment. We don't know the end. This dream is not about the end. What's interesting is we always want to know, like, okay, well, tell us the whole answer of the world. This dream is not that. This dream is about two things. It's about tacky suits and coatless kids.
Yeah. That was an awesome analysis, John. That's really good. And anything you want to add, Brian?
Yes, actually, I wanna venture out. For this is something that I emphasize on my channel, is letting people know it's okay if you're not sure, and it's okay to, hey, let God teach you and learn from others. So I want to put out there what I kind of saw as a personal revelation about the Section 2 specifically, because I felt like and I've learned the Lord does things in multi layers as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I felt that in that second section, that was the people waiting around were symbolic of obviously the world not knowing, hey, what's going on. But I felt more so kind of like the child symbolic of the church and the immaturity of the church. And the Lord, I think he kind of used that because I used to be a preschool teacher. So I used to teach kids who are 4 and 5 year olds, and for a short time, even younger. And then I did some babysitting on the side as well. So the fact that I went over and I knew the child needed to follow DJT and the twin, they needed to progress, not stay in that area where everyone else was just sitting around doing nothing. I noticed that I was standing around, so I knew I was partaking actively. And I took initiative. I felt led, okay, let's, put on your identity. You're the church, you're immature, but, believe what God says about you. And at the very least, you don't have to zip it up. You don't have to have it all together, but move forward. Don't just sit and do nothing. And then the fact that I was in the midst of that, you could almost think of it, like you said, like the soulish realm, like the carnal Christians. Um, but I was there standing almost like as a voice and able to kind of, or maybe even a sign to help, hey, wake people up and get them moving to follow God, but at the same time realize that God's hand is on DJT, and we are to follow the path of freedom and the path of fighting for freedom and for the children, and against human trafficking, the things that DJT stands for, and for America, obviously. And so being able to help the child cross into that third section, which I guess could symbolize possibly even the spiritual, carnal into spiritual, immaturity into maturity, but then also myself following along, because I definitely don't want to stay in that spot. But any parent or whatnot, or you take kids on a field trip, you don't want to only lead, but you have somebody in the back as well, kind of like observing, making sure the cattle, the sheep are all, there's no one behind you or whatnot. So that's kind of how I felt as like a personal revelation. So thought I'd share that.
Yeah.
That's pretty deep. I think it's interesting. One thing that I would add with that is the immaturity of the church, particularly birthed around an incident 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
True. That meshes them both well.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Huh.
And again,
And I think, Brian, that you have been fulfilling a role of helping people put their identities on, and of like, come on, we got to move to the next section.
Yeah, progress with the Lord.
Mhm.
We need to be growing.
What were you going to add, John?
I think there's more for you to do. I think it's timely that we're unpacking in this length and this level right now, because I don't know that the jacket's been put on the small boy and that he's moved into section 3. I feel like that is something that needs to happen or is unfolding even as we speak. But for you to know that, and for you to, maybe you'll have another dream tonight about DJT, and it'll be like, wow, this is really kind of, if I share this, and it's knowing that you have a calling to work with kids. And again, God doesn't waste anything. The whole idea of putting a coat on is literally the idea of protecting the children, which is like what this whole thing is about anyway, in a broad sense.
Wow.
Yes.
So you're assisting with that through mantling and labeling something and then moving it out of a place of waiting and in a season of almost like a stalemate into the identity and the destiny of fulfillment, which is what happens in section 3.
Yeah.
And very presumably that the baby or the child would probably go with DJT onto the helicopter wherever he goes. That's not in the dream, but that would be the assumption.
Yeah.
He needs to be with his dad. So we need
Mhm.
to move him where his dad is, and then as his dad goes up, and there's the whole idea of the Revelation 4 come up here, going through an open door, going upstairs, going up in a helicopter, prophetic revelation, vision to lead, all those things go into play just in the up the stairs to the helicopter scene. But if there is a part of this, which I agree with you and believe, that represents a church and immature, not as a broad swath across all of humanity, but particularly the church in America in relation to dealing with the prophetic and the political. I believe there's been immaturity, which is, again, what we saw in 2020, what was birthed in 2020, probably like we haven't seen that I can remember in memorable history, where there's been kind of the prophetic going a couple of different ways and a lot of consternation and different movements and different people. And so if that then goes up, come up here, come up higher, you know, even the two witnesses in Revelation, I think 11, but the Revelation 4, and then through the year of the open door, you know, into something. If you step into a helicopter and the helicopter is Marine One, and you're a person like DJT would probably never be just a guy or a passenger on that. If he's on that helicopter, it's because he's the president of the United States, I would dare say. And to have his son with them, representing the church and the prophetic together, I think that almost leads into your next dream about having a new team.
It does.
Wow.
We have been going like over an hour now. So maybe I was dreaming when I thought we could cover 3 dreams in one section. So
they're so good though, Diana. His dreams are amazing, man.
yes.
I love dreams, Brian. They're
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, they are. And I love all the meaning that you pull out of them, John. It's amazing. So can we get together again and go over those other 2 dreams? Would that work for both of you? If we do a part 2?
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Sounds good.
I just think these are very valuable training for all of us, and especially for the immature church who has been told that they shouldn't be involved in the political realm while the nation burns around us. So it is good that we begin to equip people to be an influence across all 7 mountains of society. So
amen.
Thank you both for joining me. This has been really, really amazing. And I can't wait to get together with you again. So
Yes.
we'll talk and figure out a time, and we'll be back with you. So thank you for joining us. And we look forward to having you with us again the next time we get together to talk about the mystery and the wonder of the night season parables that God gives to us. Until we meet again, may you be blessed.